So to begin, I want to welcome everyone, and I want to give a big thanks and heads up to Promise Resource Network, who have permitted us to use their Zoom account for this. We have 26 people on the call right now, and there was like 156 people registered. And this is being recorded. And if you have to leave early or you can't see it now, it will be on our Facebook page recorded, so you'll be able to see it then. So now I'm going to hand over the program to Lori Coker. Thank you.
Thanks. So if you want to go ahead and put our presentation up, we are aware before we get started that there are some potential worldwide shifts happening right now with issues going on in Ukraine and Russia and all that. And my two colleagues, Damie and Karen, both suggested we take just a minute to kind of reverently consider and offer up hope and prayer for our country and for the world, and for all the folks who have a challenge with life anyway. The repercussions of these upheavals are can be tremendous. So let's stop a few seconds and just kind of think for the citizens of the world at this time. Okay, thanks. Well, I'm really excited that folks are joining us for this today because as I think I alluded to briefly when I introduced our first topic, there was a time when there were very few voices of people who actually experienced, life in our communities, life in the system, what works, what doesn't work. There were just very few people going to Raleigh to speak from the perspective of their own lived experience and their community experience. And we are now at a place where there's so much change happening for a variety of reasons that our voices are more important than ever. So thank you, all you who have joined us this morning. And I thought we'd start with looking at the face page for this presentation. I wonder how many people recognize what this is in the photo. But it's interesting. Right outside the legislative building, on the ground, as you approach the front doors, you see this really beautiful large seal, and it's the seal of the state of North Carolina. And there's all kinds of documents for voting and determining what that seal was going to be like years back. But Karen, if you'll go to the next page, what's interesting about this seal is what it means is to be rather than to seem. And I think a lot of us have used this. I've known advocates besides myself who've used this with regard to kind of the state of affairs with our human service systems, especially our mental health system. But this is why our voices are so important, is because a lot of times people who make the decisions about how our lives are supported, treated, served, they don't really have enough individual personal understanding of what this looks like. That's impossible for a legislator to understand and have a level of expertise about everything they have to vote on. And so this is why our experiences and our voices are so important. Just so you know, historically, that seal, it's the mountains on the left and the ocean on the right. So it's like the mountains to the sea to represent North Carolina. And of course, there's the cornucopia, meaning we want to be a land of plenty. And the staff with the little red thing on it, that's a cap. And that kind of comes from Great Britain. The cap kind of had to do with community level advocacy and people using their voices and being present. So I just think it's an interesting seal. I've seen it many years, but only recently kind of read about the symbolism in it. Okay, next slide. So effective advocacy is about using relatability to inspire change. And for us, how we relate to people, and what we find the common ground around is going to be extremely important, because typically we've been kind of under-empowered and often kind of invisible when decision makers are shaping our systems, et cetera. So our role is going to be to find what's relatable and really use that from our perspectives of people with lived experience. Next slide. So I looked up relatability and got a couple of definitions. And one dimension of relatability has to do with actual factual knowledge or supportable ideas that are kind of commonly held, or with little information. There's the shared understanding about things. And so you're looking at kind of cause and effect. What are the logical connections in people's experience, and what people are seeing in their communities that they can address in a way that, say, a legislator can really understand. And one example might be that if we've seen a tremendous increase in the numbers of people being involuntarily committed to care in our communities, and yet the population has not gone up, it probably doesn't mean that all of a sudden that many more people are needing forced treatment. It probably means that people aren't being able to access the kind of treatment they need at an earlier point. So pointing at the fact that in Winston-Salem, our population hasn't almost doubled, and yet our involuntary commitment numbers have more than doubled in the last 10 years. So that's something a legislator can wrap his or her mind around. So that's looking at a fact or a supportable idea. In the next dimension, on the next page, it's the relating of our personal experience, so that we're establishing social connections or emotional connections with a shared pool of meaning with the decision maker that we're talking to. And this is real important because there's a lot of emphasis in the recovery, mental health, and substance use recovery worlds. There's been a lot of emphasis on telling our stories, and yet sometimes telling our stories, if we don't learn kind of some technique with that, we can lose people, because our stories, especially if it's a life story that involves a whole lot of trauma or a whole lot of major changes in our lives and all that, we can lose somebody whose time is short and valuable. And so helping someone to understand really effectively how your personal experience relates to the concern you're advocating about is going to be really important. And what you find through time, I know when I've talked with legislators back in the earlier years when I used to go so frequently to Raleigh, people would be stunned to find out I have bipolar disorder, because they see me standing here functional, making logical sense. And it would be their first introduction to the fact that people can actually reclaim a meaningful life, and not only just recover, but discover new talents, new abilities. That really captured the interest of legislators, the fact that people could recover, because they had never occurred to that, because what they often see in the press, doesn't suggest that. So a story can be really important, but being able to tell it effectively on measured time is going to be key. And later on in this presentation, I'll let you know there are going to be some opportunities to learn some good strategies for telling one's story offered before too long here through some educational opportunities. So the next page, I just want to give another couple of examples so that people can kind of wrap their minds around what I'm saying. Examples of relatability. At Green Tree, I learned that there were a lot of people who used to use mental health services, but they stopped using them, and they're Medicaid eligible people, but they stopped using them because of issues with the system or issues with how they felt they were being treated by providers. And we saw that in our community, the MCO that was in our community for a while actually was having a decrease of by year for 3 years in a row, 20,000 fewer people were coming and getting services than the previous year.
Lori, I
Not,
hate to do this. We're getting, I can't get a hold of Karen, and I've got a couple of text messages that people are trying to get in.
okay, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and let those people in. Let me see.
Okay, that's fine.
Participants. Okay, let's
You can go ahead, Lori. I just didn't,
Okay,
I just wanted to make sure somebody was watching it because I can't see it.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Jamie, because I couldn't see the chat. Okay, so we're gonna continue with the share. Everyone's in that wanted to get in. Okay. Thank you, Damie.
So what we had learned, our CFAC had learned that over all the counties this particular MCO was serving, not just our county, 20,000 fewer people were seeking services each year for about 3 years in a row. And I'm hearing people tell me why they no longer will go get services, and yet they're Medicaid eligible. So that tells me something is not working about the system if we're not serving the folks that we actually have the funding capacity to serve, you know. And so I could use the data of the 20,000 fewer people being served, along with the stories by people who no longer would go get services in the system, to help a decision maker understand the issues. Let's see, and then the other little examples, my own personal experience of using, having therapy with somebody that really understood how to do the trauma, a trauma-informed approach, EMDR. Some of you may be familiar with it. After the loss of my son, and being the individual who found my son after he took his life, it took me 11 years to kind of get past that before I found a really strong therapist that was able to help me work through this. And as a result, with the guidance of my psychiatrist, I'm no longer needing psychiatric medication, making the point that trauma, people's life events, do have a strong role in their mental health, and we need a system that doesn't just look at medications for treatment. Next slide. As Karen has said, you'll all get copies of these slides, so if I go through something kind of fast, don't panic. I thought it'd be helpful for you guys to understand, and this week I started looking back at some of the ways in which I got involved in legislative advocacy, and it kind of blew me away to start remembering how much time I used to spend on all this, especially in the early years. But basically, I think I happened to get acquainted with Representative Insko and some other people who were kind of the major actors on the Legislative Oversight Committee on Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Use Services. I got acquainted after being invited by somebody in another county to come to a city hall meeting to see what was about to happen. The city hall was going to try to pass an ordinance where people staying in an adult care home would not be able to leave that campus. And so that was my introduction to what was happening. At that time, more than 7,000 of our brothers and sisters were being put in adult care homes that were not there because they were the frail elderly, which was the reason these assisted living places originally were being developed. They had become an easy catch for people whose families really didn't know what else to do. So we were basically discharging people straight from the state hospitals into adult care homes all over the state. And so I started approaching Representative Insko with my concern, and I'll be interested to hear how much she remembers about all this. But you know, most legislators go home during this active session on Thursday evening, so they can have the long weekend and then come back. But Representative Insko and I would meet, and sometimes other people were brought in. She would meet with me to hear these concerns on Fridays, and so something about her understanding or her values was really triggered when she found out kind of how significant this was. And I think that resulted in a bill to study the situation further and all that. But some other bills that kind of came along that I was strongly engaged or following, the bill that actually created Consumer and Family Advisory Committees in statute. to give them a strong role in statute. That was passed in 2005, and Representative Insko spoke a bit with me, and I think with one other advocate, to get some input on what this should look like. In 2007, 2008, she co-sponsored a bill along with some other folks to give us a little bit of seed money to start an independent consumer organization. And so that's how NC Canso had gotten started. We were never able to get the state to offer block grant dollars to help us, really develop into an organization. So eventually what we became is a network. So our board, we decided to just let it be this Facebook-based network. And as many of you guys know, that's a very strong resource for disseminating information to help peers, family members, recovery-focused provider agencies kind of stay informed about things going on in the state and beyond the state. So that probably would not have gotten started without House Bill 1888. So I'm appreciative of that. Then in 2011, 2012, there was a House bill written to try to establish a more formal governance process as we were moving from having just LMEs, which is local management entities, to MCOs, which were our publicly funded managed care organizations. And I was actually sought out to help serve on this, to represent the voice of lived experience and the voice of people just living in the communities. And so I worked on a subcommittee to give input, and I think Representative Insko was on that committee too, if I remember correctly. I think I remember where you were sitting. But I will tell you that because I was independent and no one was paying me and I couldn't lose a job for what I was saying, there were people in that meeting that would pass me notes under the table about concerns or interests that they knew aligned with my interest as somebody with lived experience, so that I could say those challenging things. So I could say the challenging things that other people couldn't safely say. But I also was the one that almost single-handedly kept speaking out for the need to keep county commissioners engaged in the governance process. That is, there were a lot of people that just wanted to kind of totally divorce the public management from any local governance voices. Well, I had already learned from my own community's experience that we had no other way of leveraging input into our LME at the time without the county getting involved and having an understanding of what the community was experiencing. And so I was really glad that they had someone like me on that committee. Otherwise, it would have been totally kind of a commercially driven. The governance would have been mostly just responding to the commercial aspect of things and not the care and what people were really experiencing on the ground. So, and then 2018, there was House Bill 564 that I learned about belatedly. By that point, I was kind of invested in trying to get Green Tree going, the peer support center going and everything. But I was able to get 3 other people to help write letters. It was just kind of too late. But basically, it was a bill that was trying to come up with solutions to smooth out the crisis response systems and communities. But it leaned heavily toward making things much easier for hospitals. We don't necessarily mind that things get easier for hospitals, but what that meant was it was really empowering hospitals to go ahead and create more, have more people be involuntarily committed. And so several of us wrote to oppose that bill. We did not succeed. And that probably is part of why our IVC numbers are so high these days. Next slide, please. House Bill 983. I had gone to Representative Insko. Actually, she reached out to me. We were both giving comments to an article that was going into the Winston-Salem Journal about the Transitions to Community Living initiative and some of the challenges with that. And Representative Insko sensed that probably peer support should have a bigger role in transitioning folks. And so that got us started on conversation. And I was telling her how at our peer center, we're able to offer a lot of support for folks at the various stages of transitioning. And we do have some TCLI members that attend, but that got her interested in conversations to understand more about the mental health block grant, which is what most states use to either totally or significantly cover paying for the peer wellness centers. So there are 47 of, like Green Tree, there are 47 of those in Tennessee, just in that one state. And so Representative Insko, not only did she write a bill that it didn't get defeated, but it just didn't get to go far enough and get funded, but she started having conversations at the Department of Health and Human Services to understand, well, why are we not using our funds, our mental health block grant, to fund more things, initiatives that help promote people's wellness and people's life progress. And I really believe that was one of the biggest factors in the division within the next year, finally offering an RFA to fund 2 peer wellness centers as pilots. So that's a bill that did not pass, and yet you can see there's a lot of value to advocating. Even if a bill does not pass, you have a larger pool of legislators who are coming to terms with new information and getting behind it, able to talk to other players in our state, the decision makers at DHHS, and that helps shift the culture of how we look at recovery, people's potential. And so these relationships are so important. And then the last thing I've listed, House Bills 786 to 788, and then 734. In the recent long session, these bills didn't get through certain committees. A lot of things didn't because of the, I think the state had a big burden to look at how they were going to use all the COVID funds coming in. And then we have a major redistricting battle going on that some of you guys may know about, but it's the bills, when a bill doesn't get passed, it's not like it's necessarily over and it's gone, it's dead. And so I have been trying to work on some legislators to consider looking at these again in the short session. And my understanding, and this was validated when we heard about this at the last training with Ann Rodriguez, bills that had funding allocations or funding attached to them can go forward in the short session if people find they have merit and want to pick them up and move them forward. So we're at that stage of having these conversations. I'm aware that there are some legislators right now who are going to try to put some of these bills before certain committees, and so that's a real positive sign. Right now, I suspect that 786 and 788, those are the bills. One of them calls for North Carolina to kind of hire a recovery lead, a mental health recovery chief, to help be sure we have a recovery agenda at the division, but also to seed some funds to seed more peer wellness centers, kind of like what we're doing here and what they're doing at PRN down in Charlotte. And that's what one of the bills is about, is basically focusing on getting the recovery supports in place at the community level so that we can reduce the overuse of involuntary commitments. And then 788 is about funding some pilots through law enforcement agencies to use different ways to respond to people in crisis that will reduce the overuse of involuntary commitments. So we're hoping those 2 bills will stay live, and y'all will probably get some information about how you can help advocate for that. But it's really exciting that these bills were crafted with language from several folks whose lived experience informed their, what they contributed. And so peer advocacy is definitely going to be needed if we're going to see these bills move forward. So those are just some examples of how we can get involved and help promote change. Next slide. So as far as how to engage a legislator, first thing I wanted to remind us, we talked about in the last session and shared about kind of finding out who are the people you need to be reaching out and connecting with. And we're often told, well, you need to call your legislator, you're this, you're that, someone that's representing your region. And that is very, very important, because the senators, the elected officials, senators and House members, there's so much that there's no way they can understand if they don't hear it from community advocates. And Ann talked about meeting people at home. I've met with a lot of our local folks on a Friday at a coffee shop in past years. It's funny, I forget all this, so I've gotten older, but local representation is very, very important, because it helps them understand what's really going on in their community and how their community is experiencing the systems that they're helping to fund through their legislation. But the other real important thing is their committee roles. And so you may recall, and we hopped on the legislative website, the General Assembly's website, and Ann kind of showed how you can look up legislators, you can look up the committees they serve on, you can look up their professional histories. Some of the legislators have more listed than others, but if you find out somebody is a teacher in their past, you can probably assume they may be really interested in children's mental health issues. If you find out somebody was a nurse or a doctor, you can assume they're probably interested, but you can also assume that they probably are more familiar with a medical model only, which is managing symptoms with medications. Whereas we know there's a whole lot more to our mental health than just managing the symptoms with the medications. So we can help people understand kind of more of a biopsychosocial spiritual perspective that they might not have if they've been a doctor in the past and doing pulmonary, take care of people's breathing systems. So understanding what committees they're serving on and a little bit about their backgrounds can be really, really helpful. And you can even see what kind of bills they have sponsored in the past, because that tells you a whole lot about where they're coming from, not just by their background, but by as far as what they really find valuable. And so those help you understand ways you may be able to connect with a legislator. So looking not only at those folks that represent where you live, but looking also at those folks who may be a little bit more empowered as far as bills that impact our brothers and sisters in their lives because of the committees they're on. And when Representative Insko speaks, if she has any time, it'd be interesting to hear, how do certain people get selected for certain committees? It may just all be political, and it would be interesting to find that if that's the case. But if they do really look at people's backgrounds, it's something I've always wondered. But next page. So, and I probably learned this from, it's funny, because I didn't know if Representative Insko would be on yet, but I can remember so distinctly conversations that there's probably no way in the world, because of her thousands and thousands of conversations, that she may remember. But being somebody that I have bipolar disorder, sometimes we have issues with boundaries. And so I would learn a whole lot of stuff, and I would want to see her understand a whole lot of stuff. And so she really had to work with me on, she just said, Laurie, I really, you're kind of all over the place. I really need to understand really specifically what it is you think that we should be thinking about right now. So she doesn't realize probably the ways that she mentored me, but a lot of it was about this, kind of packaging the information differently so that it is relatable and doesn't overwhelm her. And so what I started doing was, there are a lot of ways you can get information about the issues concerning you, but I really had to kind of filter and then refilter down to the most important points I felt like a decision maker needed to know that would fuel her or him or motivate them around that issue. And so it takes preparing, it takes learning, it takes culling through and kind of digesting that information and coming up with the most important issues and prioritizing. But I'm aware that maybe I've always been more research. I've just always gone after information, and a lot of my peers and peer supporter friends weren't really cut from that cloth. But I do want to tell you, once upon a time, I remember thinking this kind of thing, what we're talking about now, is the most boring thing in the world, and who would want to do that? And back when we had a gal named Beth Melcher, who used to be really big with NAMI, that used to do a whole lot of this legislative grunt work for the rest of the advocates in the state. And I marveled that she could enjoy doing this. But what happens is, when things start mattering so much in your community and in the lives of people you know, you feel like we have to do something. So if there's any calling on us, we just have to shift our thinking around what's really going to be required of us. And you don't have to have a college degree to do a Google search and learn a whole lot. And so there are ways you can learn a lot of information to help prepare your messaging. And we'll get a little bit more into that quickly here. But the other thing that's really, really important is finding out who the legislative assistant is to that legislator. So I have through the years gotten really well acquainted with a lot of folks who were so helpful to getting really important information in front of a legislator in a timely way, because they're really, I think people tend to choose folks for their offices who's thinking, they've got good communication and they know how to think together. And what I found is the LAs often really, really understand that legislator they're working for and what might be important to them and what might not. And so it's been really helpful to have relationships with those LAs, legislative assistants. And if you go on their the General Assembly website, you will see the name of the legislative assistant is listed. I think they are linked with the email address too, but basically it's the first name, period, last name at ncleg.gov, just like with our General Assembly people. So it's first name dot last name. But anyway, so the legislative assistants can be really important. I've asked them if they would print off a specific document and leave it where it could be quickly seen by a legislator. And I can't know that they did it, but it has seemed like that has happened, because the legislators often do know what document or information I was referencing. So it's really cool that the legislative assistants can have that kind of a role, and they're approachable, they have more time, they understand the schedules of their bosses, and they can do what they can to help their bosses get what feels like really important information in a timely way. So next slide. So engaging that lawmaker again, I have found for myself what has worked probably most effectively has been starting with an email. I realize these days, even compared with just 10 or 15 years ago, people don't read emails nearly as quickly. But if you write an email that's really clear and meaningful, and perhaps you copy it to the legislative assistant, I think that when I think about all the legislators I've gotten acquainted with, it has been through email dialogue that we first started engaging. And then when I would if I called and talked to the legislative assistant, they could either put me right through or make an appointment for a conversation to happen, etc. But it's real important to be able to learn when you're trying to get a relationship started with legislator to introduce yourself briefly and identify kind of upfront why you think why you have, or identify that you have some knowledge or experience that you think would really help them understand something they're working on with a bill or so on and so forth. It's not necessarily the time to call and tell them your whole story, but to introduce yourself briefly and help them understand the relevance of why you're reaching out to them. is really important. Thank them for serving, especially if they're serving on a committee that you're hoping will bring some progress to your cause. Comment on, I say one important issue or idea, because I know how easy it is to want to comment on 3 to 5 issues or ideas in a conversation, and you can lose somebody after the second comment. So, one clear concept that may be new to a legislator can help them so much to move and shift in their thinking and open up, and then kind of have a platform for new information to land on that they can do something with. So if that makes any sense, that's why it's really important to not over-informed. Don't over-inform people. It's so easy to lose people that way. And some of you may have learned this, like I have, that it's not just talking to legislators. You can over-inform people real easily and find that it's harder to connect with them the next time you want to talk with them. So I'm just being real. But anyway, so just being as clear as you can, be passionate, but offer information that's truly kind of grounded information that seems supportable to them. And then also make yourself available. Let them know that, if there's anything I can help you understand about what this is looking like in Winston-Salem, for instance, please don't hesitate to email me or call me. And chances are you may well have them reaching back out to you, because I've had this happen several times through the years. And so be sure they have an email or phone number where they can reach out to you. I add here social media, because I'm an older gal. I can read people's tweets, but I don't know how to Twitter yet. I'm going to challenge myself in this next year to learn that. But a lot of our legislators have had to be nimble and learn how to use these things. And so Facebook, I think Representative Insko, most all of our legislators have Facebook accounts. You can message people on Facebook. You can read and kind of follow the flow of what they're working on, what they're thinking, what their priorities are. So take advantage of social media to learn what you can that will help you be a better communicator with that individual. Next slide. Remember our value, y'all. I think I said as I was introducing the first training, I'm aware that some legislators feel like anybody who's wanting to advocate about the mental health system is likely somebody who may have financial gain by advocating. So they're used to hearing from larger providers. They're used to hearing from the professional advocacy organizations. And they rarely hear from family members, and they especially don't hear from the people who know what has worked and what has hurt them as far as trying to recover a meaningful life. And so it's a really refreshing time to grow a group of us who can take our strengths and our skills and our messages to legislators. It's challenging to get sufficient funding for some programs if a legislator has already kind of gotten crisp around the edges and decided, well, that they're wanting that because they just want to line their pockets. We're the only ones that can help them understand where funds should be directed that would really have the longer term benefits. And so we really have a lot of value to offer in the legislative process. And if we even just have a small solid core of 10 or 12 people who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting and just communicating with people, I guarantee we would see a difference from what has happened in our state. And I'm sure Representative Insko can address this, but we've had a state that's gotten really fixed in its leanings on whether or not to invest funds in human services, especially mental health and substance use services, and IDD services. I try not to use initials too much. Developmental disabilities and intellectual disability services. So we can really help create a shift in how public resources get used, but it's going to take our voices, it's going to take work, and it's going to be unifying around the true experiences on the ground in the communities, because that's not what they often hear when people come to them in the legislature. So, and then just remember, if we think this system is too complex, overwhelming, confusing, and we're having to really live in it, work in it, get services in it, can you imagine how overwhelming it is to a legislator who may not only be on a committee that makes decisions about mental health, but maybe on a committee that makes decisions about early childhood education and transportation? I mean, it's they find all this information overwhelming. So we can really help clarify, help them prioritize what the needs are. So please remember, we are extremely important right now in North Carolina, peer voices. Next slide. So I just want to quickly talk about, as far as our gaining more knowledge, when you haven't been somebody, let me take a quick pause. Karen, if you want to let somebody in to the waiting room right quick.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Let me check and see who, oh, we've got 4 people who want to get in, and I'm going to let everyone in. Okay, they've all joined, and very good, if they're all trying to get in. And let me just, I think we're all set, so we can go back to the lecture then.
Okay, thank you. So I just to let the new folks know, this is being recorded, and the slides as well as the recording will be accessible through our Facebook page. We do have a Peer Voice North Carolina Peer Advocacy Facebook page that got started after our last session. So if you had to come in late, you can back up and get this information and have the slides. I know I tend to do fairly detailed slides, and promise not to, I resist the temptation to read it all, because you guys can read it for yourselves. But so we're on a slide talking about how do we educate ourselves? How do we gain more knowledge about the issues, about the system, about mental health systems in general in our country? You know, whatever the topic is, how do we teach ourselves, learn what we need to know so we can be clearer communicators when we talk with decision makers? So the first little bullet is simply to join Peer Voice North Carolina, because there are various working coalitions on specific areas of need. These topics, these coalitions formed because there was enough urgency around certain topics. And so you can go to Peer Voice North Carolina's Facebook page. There's also a website. I think it's still having some construction done to it, but if you just Google Peer Voice North Carolina, there is a website, and it'll help you understand what coalitions are there. But this is a way that we can focus together on all kinds of issues of human rights, social justice, the practices that help or the practices that are not very helpful, etc. You can serve with others on advisory committees. And so that's one of the roles of the Consumer and Family Advisory Committee. People's experience on these committees has been really variable across the state, depending on which managed care organization they're with and kind of what the organizational culture has been there. But I will tell you, there are probably too few people with lived experience that do the effort, take the effort to really become knowledgeable on these committees. There's a really welcome spot on these committees for people like us. There's also Disability Rights North Carolina is a federally funded agency that's supposed to help ensure the rights of people who are using services. And they have a committee called the PAMI Committee, Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness. And that is largely to be seated with people who have lived experience. And they're fairly frequently needing people, they need strong folks to serve, but you serve so that you can learn, and you serve so that you can contribute. So opportunities like this in our state are really important. Sorry, I got distracted by a message. Peers are also often needed on the North Carolina Commission for Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services. You may not be aware of this commission. I know when I first heard of it, I had not, but someone reached out to me about it. And I served for 6 years on it. But basically, this commission gives input to the state government side of the administrative side. So Department of Health and Human Services, if they're having to make changes to rules and establish regulations to help things operate better, realign values around different results from services, things like this, it's a real important place where people can contribute, and you learn so much about the system. So that's where I learned a lot, was by participating there on the commission. So there are a lot of places in North Carolina where people can get active, and that's how you get educated, but it's also how you give some guiding input. Web searches, there are all kinds of resources, everything from MAD in America. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but this is a group of thinkers from across the country that are really concerned that we are overusing medications or they're being poorly prescribed. And we're leaning too heavily on them. And so they're really contributing to people's ill-being and putting a lot more people on disability rather than helping. The Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. You can go to SAMHSA's website. They used to have all kinds of cool stuff about recovery. Then there was a change in the government with the last president, and a whole lot of that just totally went away. The good news is, with the current president, it's coming back, and there are conversations, and North Carolina is actually getting a lot of focus by the federal level for some of the activity going on across the peer community and trying to promote mental health recovery. So SAMHSA is a resource, and it'll be even more one in 6 months from now, I think. The National Empowerment Center, Mental Health America, there's all kinds of organizations that you can hop on their websites, and you can see there may be a form you can sign up for. A whole lot of what I've learned from NIAPRS, which is the New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services. They have long had a recovery agenda in the state of New York, and they use psychiatry and they use medications, but almost equally, they use psychosocial rehabilitation and peer support. Peer support, in a sense, is psychosocial rehabilitation, but they see a mental health challenge as not just a biological thing. And so I got a lot of education by just being on their email list for several years, and I consider the head of that organization to be a real mentor personally. So there are a lot of ways to just think about a topic, Google it, and you'll find really rich resources out there to help you learn more. Find good language, understand different models, etc. So, and then finally, as far as gaining more knowledge, simply starting or joining a local peer supporter group. There are several. Winston-Salem, we have something called the Precise Peer Support Development Group, and it's kind of Facebook based. And before COVID, we actually met in person, and we're starting to do some things that will be able to pull us back together live again now for trainings, etc. But peer supporter groups are popping up all over the state regionally, and that's an exciting sign that something's changing, that there's a movement here. And so find out what's going on locally if you happen to be a peer supporter or somebody who may consider being a peer supporter. Our group is not exclusively only for peer supporters. It's really for people with lived experience that understand the role of peer-to-peer support. So these are just some ways of being able to gain information. And if y'all can read along in the chat box, I see that people are adding resources in there that can be considered. So take a look at some of those. And next page, please, next slide. So I wanted to mention there are some legislative committees where we can learn a lot and be able to know what to respond to in talking with legislators. And the good thing is, even before COVID, I think a lot of these committees started being aired online, so that there's a link you can click on in the General Assembly website to listen in while you're working on other things. You can listen in to a committee meeting, and that's another way of learning a lot about North Carolina and how our systems are put together and how they're funded or not funded sufficiently. Good discussion. So I've listed the 4 committees I know of right now. And once upon a time, down in purple, you'll see we had a joint legislative oversight committee for mental health, developmental disabilities, and substance abuse services. And that committee met monthly if it wasn't in the middle of a long session. And Representative Insko could probably correct me on this if she thinks about it when she's presenting, but the LOC was a really important opportunity for us to all learn in a more focused way about our system, but also most meetings, they had public comment time. And so this is where a lot of us, peers and family, this is where advocates could actually address specific issues to the Legislative Oversight Committee. And you could start seeing how the LOC would start responding according to the concerns that they heard being raised. That was an extremely valuable committee. It has gone away with an administrative change. I think maybe back when McCrory, I can't remember now exactly when, but there's no, officially it could be resurrected. It's not like there was a law that said if a committee goes away, it has to stay gone. So we are being invited, Peer Voice North Carolina and us as individuals, we are being invited to advocate for the reconvening of the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee for Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services. And so you'll probably see some information coming out from Peer Voice's advocacy coalition about this, who you should reach out to, and how we should urge the reestablishment of this committee. And because for right now, what's happening is you've got the overarching Health and Human Services Committee where we're having to vie with a whole lot of other topics for focus. And there is an oversight committee on Medicaid and health choice. And that can be an important place for people to participate. But there are a lot of system issues that legislators would benefit by understanding more about that aren't going to fall under just Medicaid and the health choice program. And then now there's a more recent committee on access to health care and Medicaid expansion. The access to health care piece is going to be really, really important to folks like us, because what we learned from our personal experience and from working with others is that a crisis creates an access issue. If people are in a crisis and they are needing support and they need to be able to access, whether it's just peer-to-peer support or some of the crisis-focused care in the mental health system, how to access that is really important. If they access something that really receives them where they are and supports them toward the next step, that crisis has actually had value in their lives. But what's happening all too often is people find it so difficult to access what they need. Things build to where they get to a crisis level, and then they have to default to go to the ED, which is very expensive to taxpayers. And quite frankly, to a lot of us, we feel like it's pretty expensive to our lives, because a lot of people have fairly traumatic experiences once they have to go that route. And more than half the people who go to the ED are not admitted for clinical care. They're needing something else. But all this is an access issue. So the Access to Healthcare Committee may be one where we need to be more vocal, and that's a fairly new committee. So as we learn more, we can help people understand about that. And then during the legislative sessions, there is a House Select Committee on Health. That may be one where I think the bills that Representative Autry has helped to sponsor, those 3 bills that I spoke about in a previous slide about aimed at reducing the overuse of involuntary commitments. I'm thinking that may be one committee where Representative Donnie Lambeth may be trying to put those forth to be considered in that committee. So The legislative committees are an important opportunity. Not everybody has the time. You know, I was not working full time during a lot of those earlier years. I had some flexibility, so I would actually drive to these committee meetings, but it gave me an opportunity to meet some of the legislators and be a consistent presence with a consistent message. And so I think that was very valuable time. But I just wanted you to all know there are these committees and you can actually just participate online. Next slide. So, oh, I see now I've gone a little bit longer than I'd meant, and I knew that might happen, and I apologize. But I'm real excited that I reached out to Representative Verla Insko to see if she might join us. I remember her saying a couple of times through the years, where are the advocates? You know, I think there are times when she has probably felt like almost a lone voice in the wilderness, but here are the advocates, Representative Insko. And we look forward to hearing from you. So just while she's preparing to shift and be the speaker here, she's the longest serving House member, as I recall, and is planning to go into another phase of her life at the end of 2022. So she's planning on retiring, but I know she's going to stay active because she doesn't know how to do anything else but be really active, and that's a blessing. She's had a strong heart for human services through all her time in the legislature, and she has valued the role of a broader approach to mental health and the role of peer support in that. And so, and like I said, she would often be one of the only legislators in any of the offices when I would go to Raleigh on Fridays. So she has worked tirelessly in our behalf. And so without further ado, if we can switch this and let Representative Insko share with us some, appreciate it.
Representative Insko, are you there? Are you on the call?
We'll give her a minute. I will say she had a family medical appointment that she had to kind of work this around, but we felt like she was going to be able to get on late in the hour.
Just let, Lori, can you tell if she joined the call?
Let me, all I can do is scroll up.
I looked for, she was here at one point, but she's since disappeared, so.
Yeah.
Unless there's one of the phone calls that's her number. I see a 704 that looks like Charlotte Way though.
Yeah, I'm gonna text her right quick.
Okay.
Y'all can talk amongst yourselves. Any comments from anybody else?
Lori, this is Damie. I think, I don't know if this is, I think it's a comment and then just clarification on that. So the joint legislative committees, the one specifically on access to healthcare, is that a new one altogether? And then adding that Medicaid expansion piece to it? Because I thought they always had a access to healthcare legislative committee. It just wasn't active or something like that. I'm wondering if it's being reactivated because of the possibility of Medicaid expansion.
Yeah. A second, I'm finishing my text. I do know that this is a new committee that another legislator told me about. And what's interesting is the House Speaker, who's from one party, has called this committee, and it's actually possibly a committee that will help move things forward in considering Medicaid expansion, is my understanding, which may mean that the Republicans, and this is nothing official, this does not represent peer voice, I'm just saying, I think that the Republicans are finding ways to weigh in and get more engaged in some of our mental health issues. And so this has been fairly, like in the last, I think in the last 6 weeks been called. So it's a different committee, my understanding.
Okay, great.
And it looks like we have a lot of good input in the chat. And someone posted the PAMI, P-A-I-M-I Advocacy Committee with Disability Rights North Carolina. And that is a very good committee to get on if you're interested in the issues of mental health recovery. So there is the link there, and you could just go and click that on and get that in your, and then save it so that you can get back to it later. If you have any trouble with that, let us know. We can try to get you back there, but there is the link that was posted. Thanks, Jamie, for posting.
Yeah. If I could say that out of all the boards or committees I've ever sat on, except for Peer Voice, and I literally mean this is the most learning I've done on the advocacy side. I would say like the one committee I ever sat on where I actually learned a lot was on the PAMI Advisory Council with Disability Rights North Carolina. So and it was a great experience. So I would really encourage folks to really take a look at the list there that Lori provided. But I can really speak to, vice chaired that for a little while, but it was probably one of the best learning experiences I've ever had. But if I could also mention, this information often seems really inaccessible. So Lori, I'm glad you're doing these series, but I have a question about after a call like this, it's hard for me sometimes after a call like this to figure out how to do some things afterwards. So I see Representative Insko come on, so I'm going to actually pause. I'll pause right now.
And I would just like to take a stab at that, as we do have the Facebook page. It's the Peer Voice Advocacy Facebook page, and I will try to post that in the chat so that you can be invited to that and be a part of that, because that's a really good way to follow up.
Okay, Karen.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, let's let her in.
Welcome, Verla Insko. Verla, and we're ready to, if you're ready to talk, can you unmute yourself, or do you need some help?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm going to try to get on my computer. I'm home now.
Cool. We thank you for taking the time with us.
So did you send the link to my home computer or my General Assembly computer, or do you remember? Maybe you just sent it to my phone.
Well, and actually, I know Young got you registered too. So y'all
Okay, so that it should be in my General Assembly.
Yeah.
And while you're figuring that out, I am just very quickly going to post the link to the Facebook page, which you're all very welcome to join. Let me get that in there. Hold on a second, because I'm having a lot of different things. Everyone. Okay.
You're doing great.
There we go. There's the link. And that is the link to the Facebook group. It's the Peer Voice Advocacy Group. Please join us. On that link, you will get a copy of this recording, and you'll also get the slides, and you'll get any updates that we're looking at doing as a group. So please join us with that link, and then you'll get, we'll start being more of an activist group. We'll move into that. Right now, we're more doing the training and the knowledge building, but we're going to move into a lot more activism there. Verla, are you ready to talk now? I am going to unmute you. It looks like you're muted.
You might have to check to make sure she's not trying to join.
No,
See if there's others trying.
I'm here.
Great.
Okay. Oh, excellent.
Yay!
Hey, welcome.
Well, I haven't been on, so I don't know what you've done so far.
Okay. Well, basically, I went. I kind of did a presentation on why our voices are so important and why relationships with legislators are really important, and how the legislator, to some extent, needs to be, I mean, the relationship needs to be somewhat arising from our experiences with our mental health challenges or whatever, but it also needs to be based in knowledge, fact, ideas that people get their minds around, because there's a cause and effect. There's real linkage informationally that they can get. So I'm trying to help us realize that our stories alone are not enough. We have to do a bit of work so that our stories are supported with other information that makes our issues clearer to legislators.
Okay, so what is it that you want to accomplish? Do you actually want to get specific bills passed? Or are you trying to educate legislators in general about mental health issues, or both?
Well, I would say both, just because we have recent information that Donnie Lambeth is maybe going to try to be sure the health committee does hear those bills that John Autry and you help co-sponsor. And so we're going to be trying to advocate around those too. But this particular session, this training session, is about how to build a relationship where your information is really valued by legislators.
Well, so one of the things I would do if I were active in your group would be to see where all the members lived and who, maybe you already have done this, and you have a list of the legislators that your group can contact. And you've checked to see who's on the health committee, is that right?
We've talked about all this, yeah.
So, and it doesn't, I would say that the information doesn't always have to come from your own legislator, but I think a lot of legislators look first to serve their constituents, the people that live in their districts. So, then I would also say, look to see who's the most influential legislators, and then especially work on them. Of course, with the health committee, and you all are just grouped in the health committee this year. There's not a special committee for mental health, which I think is a mistake. But
yeah,
but the ones that are, is Sasser on this committee too?
I believe he is.
Lambeth and Sasser are both interested in Republicans that are interested in mental health. Okay. So but I think, I think individual stories and information about why a specific bill will help, what will it accomplish for for individuals or the group, how will it improve, how will it increase your capacity to live actively in the community?
That's a good point.
And I think asking them what you can do to help to help get it passed, and who would they recommend that you talk to? But I think I just go through the health committee primarily. I think an in-person visit is good, especially if you can make an appointment and get over there and have a little time. I wouldn't spend very much time, like a 10 or 15 minutes would be. I mean, we have emails coming in all the time. We have people coming by our door. This is a pretty good time right now because we're not in session, and there aren't very many people over there right now, as a matter of fact. So it would be, you might be able to make an appointment with somebody in their home district to meet in their home district and take some people. But it's sort of, tell me a couple of the bills you're working on.
Well, one of the bills is the one that would call for establishing a role at the division on mental health recovery, kind of a chief that could help be sure policy and practices are shifting in that direction versus just kind of medical management, and that bill has attached to it some funding to establish some more peer wellness centers like what we're doing at Green Tree and what they're doing at Parmas. So that's one bill. And that's the one I've been trying to get out there real quickly, started a few weeks ago, right after Pinehurst. The other bill is the one that would give law enforcement agencies some funding to develop pilots for alternative types of crisis response that weren't necessarily police-based. I think it's tied in with law enforcement because they're good at keeping the data and all that. But so that's one of the other bills that I expect is going to be getting discussed. A third bill that didn't have funds attached, so I don't know if it would be discussed, but Lambeth made reference to 3 bills. The third bill is the one about ensuring there is some process by which the HHS is actually collecting, reporting, and utilizing the data on involuntary commitments to help inform how they shape the system.
Involuntary commitments are a big deal.
Yes, they are.
And so I think that would be something to spend some time on. I think it's also a big deal in other states, and that there's sort of there's a national movement now to reduce involuntary commitments.
Yes.
So
yeah, I was going to add, I got a phone call from the ACLU, a researcher out in San Francisco, and they're looking at this issue, but they wanted to look first of all at North Carolina. And I think it's because of all the articles and everything that followed after Peer Voice went after the data and saw that, like in my county, the numbers of involuntary commitments have more than doubled since 2008. And yet our population hasn't doubled. So
going on.
Yeah, exactly. What's going on?
Well, 2008. Yeah, that's strange, isn't it?
Well, people in our communities probably don't find it too strange. If it's difficult to access services in a timely way, or the services feel really unfriendly and you're already depressed, people are not going and getting services earlier on.
Oh,
and
okay.
So what's happening is they build to the level of crisis. Families don't know how to get help, and so they end up defaulting to law enforcement to come escort somebody, and then you have to get that whole process going.
So, but that's more expensive in the long run, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And that's really important for you to point out to legislators that's not a good way to spend taxpayer dollars. There's a better way to spend taxpayer dollars.
Exactly.
So
It looks like that we have a hand raised here. Jamie Jackson Dieppe, did you have a question that you wanted to ask her?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you, Representative Insko, and thanks for working so tirelessly on our behalf. We're so glad to have you here today. I am one of the co-leads of a new coalition with Peer Voice North Carolina called Black Leaders in Mental Health Recovery. And I see a few of our folks are also on the call today. I'm reaching out because, I feel like we're a little behind on the game, but our voice is really needed right now. And so my question specifically is about one of the House bills, for example, that Lori mentioned that looks at IVCs, for example, and encouraging collection of data and reporting. One of the things that we see as Black leaders in mental health recovery is this theme around disproportionality. How do we, if we don't see our concerns or something in the language of the bill, for example, around the monitoring for disproportionality, for example, how would we go about advocating for that, or I guess amending the language? I don't know the language I need to talk about right now, but that's one of the things that we're looking at is, okay, these bills are already out here. Let's look at these bills to see if there's a way that it can benefit the Black community, disproportionality and disparities in our community. And so we're not sure where to begin.
So you're talking about bills that have been filed but haven't been acted on?
Correct. I think that would be the one. So I was using the one, for example, about IVCs. And, we're interested.
Would you amend that bill in some way?
So we're interested to make sure that they're not only collecting data, but that they are looking at disproportionality. So in disproportionality, we've seen that as a theme in school to prison pipeline and health in general, that Black people are more represented in certain areas. I don't know if they are collecting information around race, but there's some reporting that's just not happening. So in the current IVC numbers, I'm not even sure if it is disaggregated by race. So we just want to make sure that that is not, that if they're going to be reporting and doing data collection, that we are keeping in mind that this is information we want to collect.
So this would be data that DHHS is collecting?
Correct. And so I'm wondering, as a coalition, if we see something there that we know in our communities have an impact on us, that we have DHHS be tracking that, because it may need a unique kind of response in terms of the mental health systems.
Do you all have, anybody on your group have a direct relationship with Cody Kingsley or anybody in his office?
So I assist the independent reviewer for our current Olmsted settlement. So I see him indirectly on some of our meetings, but not in any other context.
So, and who's your state legislator, your House member or your Senate member?
And that's what I was just looking up. I live in Jamestown, North Carolina.
Oh, okay.
Jamie, maybe we need to connect on that because Cody Kinsley is very vocal in the CFAC, Consumer and Family Advisory Committee group. So, and he's on he does Twitter and different things like that. So there, we could work on, I could very happy to collaborate with you all to work on getting more of the messaging out there to him specifically.
In fact,
Yes.
the state CFAC actually invites public comment. So if you have something you want to get out before them, and of course, Mr. Kinsley is presenting there regularly, that's probably a good way to do it.
Well, I'm wondering though that when we want this legislated, I get it as a policy issue as well, but it seems like we would want this in the language of the bill as well.
You want a bill amendment, and that's fine. So you can call either somebody on the health committee that's active in mental health and ask them to get an amendment on the bill, and that will engage them and tell them what needs to be done. If it's not your legislator, is anybody in your group in that legislator's district?
Well,
No, this is all the work that have to be done.
well, yeah, I mean, I think there are people on that committee can hear this. I think the question you're answering is helpful to me too. Once a bill has been filed, but not passed, it could still be edited or amended.
Sure. Oh,
Okay,
it can be. You can amend a bill in committee. You could amend the bill on the floor as the whole chamber is debating it.
So now is the time, Damie, that we need to be sure that they do look at that data collection bill, that they are including demographic breakouts. So we can
So what you want to do is you want to call a legislator and say, if you know them very well, can you put me in touch with I'd like to get a bill amended. Could you put me in touch with a staff person with a bill drafter? I would do that. I would put you right. That would save me time. You could say, could you contact a state legislator a staffer to get this bill amended, or I'd be happy to talk to that person.
So we could find out, for instance, from John Autry, who the bill drafter was on those bills.
Well, you might not get the same drafter, but they all have familiarity with these bills and what need to be done. And there's no ownership of the bills.
Yeah.
So you just want to get a bill drafter that works on healthcare or mental health.
I gotcha.
Thank you so much.
But you could ask.
That's great help, great advice.
I mean, the legislator can call the bill drafter, but it takes the legislator's time. And
exactly. And if
there's a back and forth that needs to go on, it needs to go on between the people who know
the two of them anyway. Yeah, that makes sense. Good idea. Thank you. Any other questions?
But I think you talked about building relationships. It's repeated contact, but not consuming a legislator's time. You know, when there's actually something, some piece of information, a little short note or letter, dropping by when you're in Raleigh, dropping by offices just to say hello.
We want to thank you so much, Verla Insko and Lori Coker. This has been amazing. And it's for us out here in the big world where we have to deal with our mental health issues and our family members who have severe mental illness. It's a very hard process. So this has been, as I say, it's been recorded. And there is going to be a CFAC legislative breakfast on Saturday. So that gives those people an opportunity to talk directly to their legislatures. So
Yes.
there are those opportunities there. So anyone, I don't know if there's any other person here on CFAC, but that's one opportunity. And I think we just need to grab those opportunities when we can, once we are familiar, once we have the messaging and we're familiar with the issues. I mean, we're familiar with our lived experience, but how to reach the legislatures on that to help create change.
Yeah. And I'll see you on Saturday too.
Yeah, this is going to be an online one, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, you
Okay.
will be there too at the CFAC, the legislative breakfast?
Yeah.
She's always at the legislative breakfast.
I don't know if there's anything, this is a little bit of activism maybe we can do as a follow-up. What do we want to communicate at this legislative breakfast? And that's something we can start with our Facebook page, and we can put something together in this group to communicate then on Saturday. Okay, that's just an offering, a suggestion. I'm on CFAC, I can be there, and I can be there virtually. So that's just a little start. It's a little step forward from this meeting. Are there any other suggestions? And if not, we're at 1:30 already, so we're a half hour over. Are there any other comments or thoughts before we close for today?
I just wanted to add, someone requested that we add the links to the bills. I got the links for 2 of the bills in there, but also if you just go to the General Assembly website, which I also put the short link in, you can just Google North Carolina General Assembly and it'll pop it up. But you'll see there's a bar on the right that says bill lookup. And that's how you can look up a bill. So it's 786, 787, and 788.
And also we should be able to put those on our Peer Voice Advocacy Facebook page, and we will get those on there, all those bills, the links to them. So join the Peer Voice Advocacy Facebook page, and you can look up the links that way. Damie, did you want to say something?
No, I'm okay. I'm good. Thank you.
I think Verla had something else she was trying to. Oh, you
Nope.
didn't? I thought I heard something. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So how many people did we actually have after all?
Well, we had a total of 29 people join us out of about 156 that pre-registered.
Okay.
And yeah, so awesome. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Watch for the recording coming up soon. And we'll all be working together, hopefully, on this as time continues to make a difference in the state of North Carolina. Thank you so much, Lori. Thank you so much, Damie and Representative Insko. And we'll sign off for now.
Thank you.